We finish our 10-minute break.
Yes, well, I'm here anyway, so.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, I hope you take your coffee, and I think we can start again with Mark. Okay, thank you, Mark.
Yep, good to see I didn't scare anyone away.
No, we're still here, don't worry.
All right, let me go here. I'm going to try to change my modes because I'm going to try to get into some examples here as I'm talking through of the different systems. Let me get rid of that if I can. All right, so we'll do an overview of federal procurement. So in this module, so we've learned about the different types of the US governments and how they may or may not proceed with procurement. We've learned about how European countries, companies can compete within the US market. We've learned about entities and the types of things you might need to do to register and some considerations you might need to have. Okay, that's just the ground rules. Now let's get into, okay, let's assume you're registered, you're ready to go. What is actually federal procurement? So understanding the rules that govern the procurement, understanding something called purchasing thresholds, basically what are the different limits and what are the different rules within each limit. And then how does the government actually purchase? Okay, this one you'll want to get really familiar with. It's called the FAR. The Federal Acquisition Regulation. What is it? It is the guidelines by which all executive agencies, so in the US, we have the legislative, judicial, and executive branch. So think White House, presidential agencies. This would be Department of Energy, Department of Defense, all the ones that you might be familiar with, how they acquire supplies and services. So one of the things that sets the federal level apart from the state and local levels is simply they're just bigger. They're more mature, they have more regulations, they've bought more, they've encountered more. And so their framework is more standardized. It's more easily understood, and it's more consistent across agencies. Not that state and local governments are complex, but you're just going to see a higher level of professionalism, a higher level of standardization across the different agencies. This is included, the FAR, in almost all federal contracts as the terms and conditions. One thing to note is that these are basically non-negotiable. These are a set of considerations, a set of guidelines and contract terms that you just need to live with. And so if for whatever reason there's a term or condition in the FAR that is a no-go for you, no harm, no foul, you just won't be able to do business with the government with these considerations. So what do they contain? We'll actually look at that here in a minute around the different supplements. There's over 50 some odd sections. Why does it exist? Again, standardization, efficiency, and they're trying to drive simplicity. So if you're buying 5.8 million contracts, how do you try to make that easy across 250 agencies? You try to create a common playbook. Who uses it? Department of Defense, General Services Administration, NASA, they all use it. Some of them have what's called supplements. So those would be sub rules that only apply to their agency. All right, so let's not get too complex here. This worked before, my apologies. There we go. All right, I hope this website's coming through for you. So this would be one that's called acquisition.gov. And here you can see this is the FAR. You can download it, you can look at it. It's broken down into things like competitive requirements, acquisition planning, how the US goes about planning its acquisition, contractor qualifications. So what are the rules for qualifying as a contractor? If you do market research, contracting by negotiation. So what's allowed to be negotiated, what isn't allowed, how does sealed bidding work? And we'll get into the different types of contract mechanisms. We'll get into the different types of acquisitions later in this training. But I just wanted to give you, there's some small business, how do emergency acquisitions work? So what if they don't have time to go through a 2-month procurement process? What if they need something yesterday? How does that work? Again, foreign acquisition. So how does acquiring, and in this sense, we're acquiring things, say for the Department of State. We have embassies all over the world. We have military bases all over the world. To us, what does it mean to buy things for the United States government in a foreign country, a non-US country? How do taxes apply? Again, I won't go through everything, but I think this gives you a sense of the maturity and the amount of information that is covered here within the FAR. All right. So meet the team. So who is actually doing the buying? So you've got the purchaser. So they're generally the person at the government agency who has the need for the good or the service or the construction work. The contracting officer. This is the person whose job is to run or to take that need for the good, service, or work and turn it into a document or run it through the purchasing process if the amount is of a low enough threshold. We'll get into that in a minute. Basically, this is the person who pushes all the paperwork, who manages all the different processes, that helps the purchaser stay within the guidelines outlined by the FAR. Because you cannot expect someone whose focus is in agriculture and getting farmers to do X, Y, or Z to know about contract section 16 within the FAR. So this is basically the contracting expert, the contracting officer, guides the purchaser through the process of buying something for the US government. There's also something called a contract coordinator. So this is different than the contracting officer. This is the person if your contract is big enough. Think like a multi-million-dollar construction contract, something like that, that would basically be in charge of project managing the contract on behalf of the purchaser, on behalf of the contracting officer once an award has been issued. Sometimes a contracting officer may become a contract coordinator. So the person who put out the RFP, who ran that process, may ultimately end up managing it on behalf of the purchaser. All right. Again, there's different people within this, but these are the three main people that I've encountered at the federal level that I think you should have at least an awareness of who they may be. You as a, oh, sorry, go ahead. Okay, you as a company may likely only be dealing with the contracting officer and then only deal with the purchaser or the contract coordinator once you've been awarded the contract and are fulfilling whatever good or service or work has been purchased. All right. Procurement process, high level. So if we're trying to orient you within a framework as we go into some more detail, what is the 100,000-foot view look like? So the purchaser identifies the need. Then there's an acquisition plan that's outlined by the FAR that dictates what needs to be done based on what you're trying to purchase. It may require some market research. There's budget thresholds, and then within the budget thresholds that dictates the different rules that would or would not apply. And then also it can determine the type of method or the contract type. And we'll get into that later in this training, what those different options are. And then if required, if it's a big enough purchase or it's required to go to a RFP, there's a competitive bid process. So then there's, the notifications. How do you make everyone aware that this is out there so everyone has a fair chance to bid on it? What does that RFP process look like, and how are vendors selected? And then there's an entire process where the award happens. So a vendor might be notified, congratulations, we want to buy from you. You were the best value. You met our requirements the most. You were the only one that could do X, Y, or Z. And now we want to go under contract with you. Now we want to negotiate the specific terms of this contract with you. And so you'll have, and maybe they might say we need interviews. Maybe there were 2 or 3 contractors that were met all the requirements. And so now they need you to come in and demo your product. They need you to sit for an interview so they understand who they're buying from. And that can factor into like a second tier of requirements. We'll get into the whole awards process in our second module. So that's something to look forward to. All right, purchasing thresholds. We're going to spend a minute here because this becomes really important for what you will be required to do or not do based on what the government's trying to purchase and for how much. So this is covered by section 13 of the FAR. There's 3 different thresholds here. Essentially, we've got on the left the most simple threshold, which is called micro thresholds. The idea here is that the government doesn't want to have to do a lengthy bid process or go through a bunch of paperwork or waste everyone's time if it's a low enough dollar value. So if they're trying to buy staples or they're trying to buy a desk for someone, they have what's called a purchase card or a P card, similar to a credit card. In fact, I think it is a credit card, and it allows a purchaser to buy directly from a vendor without having to go to an RFP or a lengthy process. And minimum quantities can be enforced. So the purchaser can say, I need 3 desks, and you're able to provide that for under, I believe if it's inside the US, it's $20,000. And if we're purchasing something, say for an embassy or a military base outside of the US, that threshold goes up to $35,000. So this may be a consideration if you're thinking of doing business in the US. Do you want to go through a lengthy contracting process, or are you able to sell your goods or services in such a way that you can avoid triggering certain thresholds? The next one up from this is called the simplified acquisition threshold. So this one, because of the dollar value, it's $250,000 or more. This is where there's some legwork that needs to be done, some paperwork that needs to be done, but you're still not at the competitive bid process of what we might think is the RFP. So the purchaser, so this is the base agency. So again, think Department of Agriculture. They might be buying something for farmers or whatever. They've got to survey their contractors, and there's a couple ways they can do that. They can look at something called GSA Advantage, which is an online marketplace of pre-vetted vendors, and we'll go through that in a minute of what that is. They can look at published price lists. So let's say they just go on the web and they search farm equipment and they see a price list on John Deere and they see it on Caterpillar and maybe one other, and they can compare those. That's good enough as long as they can document that. Or they may actually go out and say, we need some quotes, and it's just a simple 1-pager. Can you provide, a tractor, and at what price? Again, I'm using very simple explanations here or examples, but it can get much more complex. And then the way that they would purchase. So they may have to go through a contract, and then you might be on what's like a net 30 terms, get paid later. Or if the government agency has a high enough threshold on their credit card, they could actually put it on a P card. One thing to note here for simplified acquisitions, the middle layer here, they typically are reserved for what's called set-asides. And we'll get into that because it becomes important. And set-asides are special companies that are given a designation, and it's meant to even the playing field. It's meant to make everything more fair, because these set-asides may have a disadvantage or may not have a knowledge to be able to compete with some bigger companies or with groups that have more experience. Now moving to the most complex threshold. So now you're purchasing, these are your bigger contracts, multi-million dollars, you're thinking $800,000, those kind of things. This must be a competitive process. This has to be transparent, fair, and RFP notifications, and all of that. And so it's 30-day notice. There's the whole FAR section, section 8 that goes through this. And then the criteria can change, but essentially at a very high level, it's the best value. So that may not mean the cheapest. It may mean good price, highly qualified, knowledgeable, good customer service. There may be some criteria around based locally, but this is what you would think of when you think of like RFPs or true solicitations would be at this higher purchasing threshold. Okay, so we've gone from simplest, just buy it on a credit card, it's under $20,000, to the middle, simplified acquisition. I just have to do some research, but I can still purchase pretty simply up to $250,000. That's a nice chunk of change. Or if I'm over that, then I've got to go, if I'm over 250,000, I've now got to go through a competitive process. So that's what determines your contract mechanism. It's what determines how the government can buy and what methods they may or may not use. I know this is a lot to throw at you. Is there any questions here around what I've outlined, again, at the high level? All right. And again, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. This is for your benefit. All right, purchase card. What is that? Simply, it's a federal government issued credit card where you have to pay your credit card that's in your name. This is a credit card that the federal government has to pay in their name. It can be used at the micro threshold, $20,000 and under for domestic purchases, $35,000 and under for foreign purchases outside of the US. There's also in the simplified, they could purchase up to $250,000 from you on a credit card if they've gone through the steps to verify 3 vendors on the middle tier. It can also be used for scheduled contractors. You are required, if you choose to be a scheduled contractor, and we'll go through that here in a minute, what that means. You are required to take purchasing cards, credit cards for anything on the micro purchase threshold, so 20,000 and under, and you're encouraged to do so for purchases over that threshold, but you're not required to. Again, purchasing card, P card, same thing. Questions here? Okay. Simplified acquisition procedures. Whew, man, my tongue's going to be tied in a knot when I'm done with this. All right. It gives them the flexibility. So this is the middle tier. This gives the purchaser flexibility to purchase a good and service without having to do a full bid. So this is anything between $20,000 and $250,000 in a good or service. What is it meant to do? It's meant to be cost reductive from the administrative side, so you don't need a contracting officer. It improves opportunities, so it gives small businesses, set-asides, folks that may be disadvantaged, an ability to bid on jobs that are considered low dollar value. I know $250,000 is a lot to me, but it isn't to the federal government. And so, on relatively low dollar value purchases, they can improve opportunities, efficiency, and scale. If you're buying 5.8 million contracts a year, you've got to be able to scale, you've got to be efficient, and then just reduce workload overall. You can see this applied in many ways, whether it's through GSA Advantage, price lists, or quotes. This is simply the 3 biggest mechanisms that I've seen as far as this middle layer of how they go about justifying their purchase. All right, so competitive process. So now we're in the bigger purchases, anything above $250,000. There's a fixed firm price contract. So I'm going to provide you a tractor for $300,000. There's no negotiating, there's no changing it. What I said I would do for that price. An example would be light fixtures for goods here. Next one would be a cost-based contract. So in this one, think research and development, where the government wants to be able to find a breakthrough in energy research or maybe in some weaponry for national defense, but they don't really know how much it's going to cost. This gives them the ability to issue contracts for those kind of more ambiguous procurement items, but they do have a cost limit on the upper end that would require change orders or other things. A third method that you commonly will see is time and materials, otherwise referred to as T&M. So those are interchangeable. This is for when you have a service or work, but you don't really know the quantity that you might need. So for example, construction or say for natural disaster recovery. We get hit by hurricanes quite often here in the coastal United States on the eastern side, most recently in Florida. And the federal government can have these contracts in place with vendors ahead of time. It can say, you will provide debris removal services. You will provide meals to people who've lost their homes at shelter X or shelter Y. I don't know how many people are going to be needed. Is it 1 million? Is it 2 million people? But we're going to pay you $10 a meal for every meal that you provide in shelter X. So that's a type of time and material contract that you might see. And it's governed by Section 16 of the FAR. Indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contracts. So this is another one that you might see. This one is when multiple agencies want to buy off of a contract. So for example, this is where, say, the Department of Agriculture wants to buy cleaning services for its offices. Well, the Department of State or Department of Defense also has offices, also needs cleaning services. So why do they need to go contract for multiple cleaning services when the GSA, as the single agency buying on behalf of those agencies, can issue one contract for cleaning services or maybe multiple contracts. And then those agencies can just use those contracts as needed and not have to go through a procurement for each time. So those are the contracts that you might see based on what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it. All right, so we've alluded to this a couple times, these special designations. The goal of this section here, so if we've talked about the limits of what the federal government can purchase and how, and the means that they might do it and how they might contract, here we're going to talk about the entities, so the companies, and some special ones that you might want to be aware of. So here we want to understand when they can buy without using the competitive process. We call that sole source justifications. So buying from a single vendor rather than going out competitively when you might otherwise be required to. Understanding who gets preferred or reserved access, meaning, think VIP section at a concert, only certain people with the tickets get in, and after that, no one else is getting in. And then also understanding the GSA marketplace and schedules. So this is a way that the government tries to simplify things. All right, sole sourced. Everyone wants to be the sole source. I don't want to have to go through the bid process. I just want the government to buy for me and only me. When can you do this? How can you make that happen? So this is when the government needs to bypass the procurement process, the RFP process. So 250,000 and above. How is it governed? It's governed by sections 6 and 13 of the FAR. Again, got to know that FAR, get familiar with it, or have someone who is. But the general guidelines is that anything over $10,000 or $20,000 requires a written justification and approval. So justifications might be limited to, like, there's limited competition in the marketplace. So maybe only one company does this service, or only one company provides this product. It might be a justification that the Department of the Interior has bought pickup trucks all from Ford for driving through the national parks. And so they need to continue buying Fords because buying Chevrolets or buying Nissans, the mechanics are different. They have to buy different sets of parts and it's going to be more expensive. And so maybe they have a name brand justification. Maybe there's a limited supply. So think supply chain issues that we ran into COVID. So you can't find those N95 masks. And I've only got this one vendor that I can buy from, and I need to just only buy from them because no one else can offer it. And then also another common situation, again, is natural disasters. And so during COVID-19, for instance, the US was under a national declaration of emergency. And many of the competitive processes were suspended in areas where they needed medical supplies. So think your Veterans Administration hospitals, think about your Army tents that go out into communities, National Guard services that would go out and do testing or disaster relief services. They need to be able to buy quickly and from the person that can get it to them the quickest, and buying the cheapest, or they don't have time to deal with that. And so that's another justification. One thing to note here, remember we talked about who's in the process. There's your purchaser, the person who has the need, and then there's your contracting officer. So since we're above $250,000, you have got to go through the process, you got to do your paperwork. This is no different. And then depending on how much you're trying to buy, so let's say, for instance, the Centers for Disease Control is trying to buy testing kits for all 50 states for COVID-19, and that's going to cost $50 million. That's going to have a different level of approval, a different set of tiers that you need to justify and go through than, say, the Department of Agriculture trying to buy 5 tractors for farmers in Arizona. And so based on how much you're trying to buy, you might have different requirements in this, but this is, if you can make this work, this is a really good way to get yourself in without having to really reduce your price or really have to compete or things like that. So this is one consideration that I wanted y'all to be aware of. And these can be denied. So even if your purchaser wants to go through it and you feel like you've got a valid reason for it, they can still be denied by their manager or whomever controls the budget in that situation. So this is not a one and done, going to be justified every time, but it's definitely something available. All right, set-asides. So this is an attempt by the federal government to give folks who have not always had the most fair opportunities in the business world, or they want to try to create equality. We don't always succeed in that as a country, but we strive to create an even playing field. So what is a set-aside? It is an individual or a company, because an individual can be a company depending on your structure, that gets a special designation. And over on the right, you'll see a woman-owned business, small disadvantaged, or what we call 8A is a designation for a small business, hub zones, or service disabled veteran-owned businesses. So in each of these scenarios, the government is trying to say, okay, for simplified acquisitions, anything between $20,000 and $250,000, we want to buy not necessarily from the big guys. We want to give those small businesses, or those folks that need a little bit of extra help in order to get their business started or to compete effectively, the ability to bid and win contracts they might not otherwise get. So people who fight for our country, veterans who've been disabled, should get that opportunity. People who live in underutilized business zones, so think rural Louisiana, rural Mississippi, where there's not many businesses or opportunities, but someone's trying to start a business there. A disadvantaged business, so think Native Americans, maybe think minorities, Blacks or Asians, and then also think woman-owned businesses. Our own criteria, you have to be certified, so you actually have to go through a process to be certified. But why I mention this is this doesn't necessarily apply to your company specifically. But if you are thinking of partnering with a company here in the US and letting them sell on behalf of you here, or they might be a prime contractor and you might be a subcontractor, one of the ways that you can get reserved or preferential access to the American market, to contracts between $20,000 and $250,000, is to work with a set-aside. So you might choose a woman-owned business, you might choose a veteran-owned business, or one of these businesses from an economically disadvantaged area. And that can open up contracting opportunities that you might not otherwise qualify for. So now your pie, instead of being this big, is now way bigger, because now you've been able to get into that VIP section. You've been able to get that ticket to the best seats in the concert. Any questions here? Cool.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the set aside, it is related just to US citizen. I mean, it's not, we can't be part of any special group as a European company. Is it right?
Correct. This is reserved solely for US citizens.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, GSA schedule. So here, this is one area where you can participate in. And what is a GSA schedule? It's simply a list of products and services that have been awarded or already gone through a set of due diligence that the federal government already knows is being provided in a quality manner at a reasonable price, and is a way that purchasers can buy without having to go through the purchasing thresholds. So this is an exception to the purchasing thresholds that I mentioned earlier. And the way that you would see this is something called GSA Advantage. And this is open to any company that is part of the WTO, the GPA provisions. So all of y'all would be able to participate in this. The process can take between 3 and 6 months to get qualified here. But once you're on there, anyone within the federal government and sometimes the state governments and local governments are able to purchase directly from you, because you've already gone through the process of establishing with the federal government that you're offering your best price, and it's a good or service that is in need or is wanted. Here I mentioned, let's tie this back to an earlier concept, TTA compliance. So if you'll remember earlier this morning or earlier this afternoon, we talked about the US trying to buy from friendly or allied countries. TTA compliance is mandatory. So a firm from China would struggle to get this, whereas a European firm, you're already grandfathered into that. There's a concept here called most favored pricing. So this is a consideration that you should be aware of if you choose to pursue this GSA schedule, which is that the federal government is asking for your best pricing, period. So this may mean that today I get on the schedule and I'm willing to sell a light fixture for $100 a fixture. But then I bid on a contract 6 months from now for the Department of Energy, and I say, I'm going to give you that same fixture for $95. By the rules here, you are now required to offer your light fixture at $95 on the GSA schedule. Said differently, it's not just to government buyers, your private buyers too. So the government is just saying, you need to offer your best pricing to us on GSA, and for doing so, we will let you bypass the entire competitive process. You don't have to go through RFPs. You don't have to go through, and anyone who wants to buy from you, let's say you're talking to the Department of State, and they want to put a bunch of lighting fixtures in their embassy, but they're like, we want to buy $500,000 worth of, and we've got to go to competitive bid. You can say, actually, you don't. You can go to GSA schedule and buy our light fixtures off of there, and then they can buy from you directly. So it's a give and take. There are some trade-offs. There's definitely some advantages, but that's a really key concept to understand is most favored pricing. Okay. So let me try this again. Yeah, you're going to make me exit, aren't you? All right, so this is what it looks like. So this is the view that anyone from the government or from even like I'm not in the government, but I can see this and I can search for products. So let me type in lighting fixtures. And you can see here, it's just like Amazon, it's or any of the other things, probably not as slick, but you can now see that I can now, as a government employee, I could go in here and buy the LED task lighting aluminum, and it's supplied by GSA Global Supply, and I can read about it if I wanted to click into it. There's my zip code. And then you can start seeing some things about it. But essentially what this means is that this is the Amazon of government buying. So whereas if the government went to, for instance, Amazon or Walmart or whomever, and wanted to buy this light fixture, they could do so on their P card because it's under $20,000. But let's say they're trying to outfit an entire building. Or let's just say they want to get the best pricing. They want to make it easy. So there's other things here that you can see these set asides. So some government agencies have quotas or goals, like they want to buy 40% of their needs from a small business, or maybe they want to buy 20% of what they're trying to do from a service disabled veteran-owned business. So someone who's a veteran who fought for our country, they want to reward that. They want to buy 20% of their products to help those businesses. Fine. So you can, just like anything else, you can search on those criteria, and it helps count towards their purchase quotas. So again, a lot of these concepts can be interrelated. So having a woman-owned business or having a veteran-owned business that has these certifications that can be your reseller here in the US, they are, I guarantee you, if they've got that certification, they know GSA, they know how to do the government procurement because they've had to go through all these processes themselves, and they can be your representative, and they can help you if a buyer is looking to buy directly from those criteria, help you get your product sold. So price isn't always the key motivator. Sometimes it's, I want to buy from a woman-owned business. But this would be basically Amazon for the federal government and some of the state governments to buy from. All right. Excellent. So were there any questions or comments here for GSA Advantage? All right.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What you suggest for I give an example for companies related to Luce in Veneto, which is our Italian cluster. In our case, we are already UL compliant for products. So we have the UL mark for product that we sell from Europe to American market. So we are ready to install product directly. Do you think that to put a number of product in GSAadvantage.org website could be useful of interest, or do you think is quite complicated to manage order that we can get from the GSAadvantage.org website?
Let me restate your question to make sure I clearly understand it. So your company sells a product that is UL listed and certified, meaning it can be sold in the US. You are asking, is that certification going to be helpful within GSA?
My question is that our companies already export products that are ready for the US market. And for sure, we are, for the moment, all companies are based in Italy. There are not any subsidiaries in the US. So if they put the product in GSAadvantage.org, that you call the Amazon for public administration in the US, it could be a good way to sell product, or maybe over way that many different kind of public procurement you presented before are better.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying. I think I understand your question. So is it worth it to put this on GSA, or is there another mechanism that you would use? I would say it depends on your market research. So for instance, I would go to this website and I would see, for instance, how many UL lighting fixtures are already on here, and how many different people are trying to sell on here, and whether it would be worth going through, because remember, this process can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It's not necessarily an easy process, but what it does is it helps you save time later on if you think there's a big need for your product.
Okay.
So said differently, is it better to go through the simplified acquisition, the lower threshold purchasing, like purchase cards and all of that? The key there is are you going to know enough of the purchasers that they're going to want to buy from you? For instance, are you going to know the people in the Department of Agriculture, in the Department of Energy, in the CDC that want to buy this, and they know you and they're willing to buy directly from you on a purchase card? Or that whole market awareness, the entire knowledge that you are even selling anything. That's one advantage that the GSA gives you, is now any buyer, whether you know about them or not, sees you're on there. And so it really depends, how well known are you? How well do you think you can get to the end buyer to have them want to buy from you, or do they even know you exist? I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you all for staying with me. I know this can be dry at times. Procurement documents. Okay, so we've studied about the thresholds. We've studied about the different contracting mechanisms that can be used, the different set-asides and the Amazon of the government procurement. So now what are the different types of documents you might see? So here, the goal here is to understand the documents and when not, they won't be used. Whew, okay, hope you got your glasses. Here we've got 3 main types. The RFI, request for information. So think here, these documents are mainly used when they're buying $250,000 of products, services, or goods or more. So these are for the higher value contracts. This is where the government says, I don't really know what the product, I don't know the state of the market. I don't really understand what's even being offered. We're just ignorant. Can you please educate us, companies? And so they will put out what's called an RFI, request for information. Or maybe they do know about the products, but they don't understand pricing, or they don't understand a certain part of what the market's done because, again, COVID, supply chains, inflation, what's currently going out there. They may have a budget of $500,000, but the way the inflation has gone in the supply chains, that same thing that would have been $500,000 a year ago is now 750, but they don't know if their budget's going to be enough. They might put out an RFI. One thing to note here is it's not binding. However, I would caution here, that's why I've got the little caution symbol. Any information that you provide in a response to a government, to the government as part of an RFI, an RFQ, an RFP, anything on the competitive process is what's deemed discoverable. Said differently, it's public information. Because we have fair and transparency and we try to make things visible to everyone and that the rules are the same for everyone, one part of that is that if someone wishes to what's called freedom of information request, and there are other means to do it, but if they submit a document to the government that says, we want to know about RFP 123, then the government will look at it and they will provide the information there that is been provided to them because it's public information. There are some caveats here. There's some exceptions where you can say this is private information. I would caution you against that because nothing here is required in the RFI. I would save that because you don't want to give away any competitive information or any sensitive information. And just because you call something competitive or sensitive does not mean that the government views it the same way. And so it's up to them and their sole determination if something is competitive or sensitive and whether or not to release it as public information. So I would just, it's like one of those things, you answer the question enough to get you to the next step or to give your buyer enough information, but you don't over answer it. Pricing can sometimes be requested here. And what it means is that they're going to help set budgetary needs. So you might give some indications of what your products cost or services cost, but by all means, you don't have to. And this is usually considered a beginning step. It usually does not mean if I don't answer the RFI, I won't be able to move forward. Said differently, if I don't answer the RFI, I will likely still be able to bid when the RFP comes out. One strategy that I've seen is that people, if they see an RFI, will use the responses to that because it's public information to understand who their competitors are, to understand what the current state of the market is, and maybe get some information that they wouldn't have otherwise got because it's not just informing the government, it's informing the public because the government works for the public. Some terminologies here, you might see request for qualifications. Similar thing. They're just wanting to know, what do you do as a company? How do you do it? What's the current state of the product or the marketplace, your pricing, and then also give us some key information. Is there a key part about your product or service that we as the government buyer should really be aware of? Maybe your light saves 50% more energy because you use technology X, and they should require technology X when they're purchasing. That's a good thing to let the government know about in the RFI so that that can become a requirement. And suddenly, if you're the only one able to provide technology X and they come out to bid, you have the advantage in the bid. So there's a lot of different ways that you can inform the process, inform the buyer, and help make things more favorable for yourself. The second type of document you'll see here is a request for quotation. Again, all the letters kind of jumbled together, RFQ. This is used as part of like a simplified acquisition process. So think the middle part of the buying. So this is between $20,000 and $250,000. And what they'll ask for is you need to provide the cost of your good or service, taxes, and shipping. Now, is this binding? The word binding means, can the government make you do what you said in your response if you submit a response? And the answer here is typically not, but it's not considered binding until the federal government accepts it and you confirm receipt of it, meaning they want to buy from you and you say, I've got your order and we'll move forward. Now, there are as with anything here, I'm giving you the general framework. There are always exceptions. But the government generally has to say, I want to buy from you. And you have to say, yes, and I'm willing to provide it. But it's going to be based on what you submitted in your quotation. And that's for the middle tier of purchasing. The next level is your request for proposal, so RFP. And this is what you would traditionally think as, your 50, 100-page responses, your technical criteria, your pricing, your references, all of those good things that we'll learn about in the next module, module 2, in a few weeks. Here, changes, it's very dependent on the RFP. Are you allowed to make changes to what you submit to the government? You should assume that whatever you submit in an RFP is going to be binding and that you will not be able to change it unless the solicitation, the RFP, specifically states that you're allowed to change it. Meaning, if I say I'm going to provide 100 light fixtures at $200,000, then that's what you're going to need to do. And you should not assume that you can swap out types of lighting fixtures, or you can suddenly charge $220,000 because of inflation. I would just know whatever you submit is likely what's going to go under contract. Again, like with anything, when you submit it, you're submitting a final version of what you're going to offer. And if the government decides to sign the documents and give it back to you, then it becomes binding and you need to do it. Negotiations. So everyone has a price, everything's negotiable except the FAR terms and conditions. Those 52 sections that sets the terms for buying across the government. However, there are specific RFP parts that could be negotiated. So for instance, if you're doing a construction project or you're providing a piece of equipment and you say, I can meet this technical specification, but with an alternate. I can do it using method B or method C instead of method A. That's for you and the contracting officer to talk through and negotiate about doing. Okay, those are the 3 main types of documents that you'll see when the government does need to go out for competitive bid. Gathering information, gathering pricing and qualifications, gathering firm offers. Questions, comments? All right. Everyone's still awake? All right. And then that basically brings us to the end of this tutorial
Sorry,
here.
We're still here, still watching.
No, you're good. I try to inject a little bit of humor.
It's just that it's interesting. I have no questions on my end, but we're still here. No worries.
Excellent. Thank you. Some helpful resources. So again, you'll see here all the topics that we've covered in today's session, and links to more information, checklists, processes, how you do it. This is your ability to dive much deeper in, and each one of these could really be a training in and of itself. My goal here today was to just make sure that you have an awareness, you have enough information to be dangerous, and then should you choose to move forward, you at least have some idea how to. At this point in time, I'm going to minimize this, and then I can see your lovely faces. So are there any general comments or questions based on what we've reviewed today that I can help answer? Going once, twice, sold. All right, in module 2, what we can look forward to is now doing a deep dive into the procurement process. So this would be around that 3rd higher end value of the contracting. So when they've got to go out to an RFP, when they've got to do the competitive bid process, what does that process look like from when the buyer says, I have a need, the purchaser, to the contracting officer going through the different steps? What are some considerations? How do you answer questions? What documents do you need to provide? How are you going to be evaluated? All of that good stuff.
I have a question to the last part about the request of information.
Yes, sir.
Quotation proposal. Do you think this kind of modalities apply to lighting products? I mean, for example, request for proposal, it seems for big project, not just for lighting pictures or similar kind of products. So what do you think is any possibilities here?
Yeah. Yes, and what I would say is it all comes down again to money. What is your price point? So if your product sells for 50 euros or 100 euros a piece, and someone might only buy 5 or 6 of them, you're generally going to be at that credit card level, or maybe needing to work with a partner. You're not going to really see your RFPs. But if someone's trying to outfit an entire building where they need to buy, a massive amount of lighting, you might have to go through the RFP process. Another way that it might apply to you is if you're a subcontractor. Maybe you have a relationship with a construction firm, or maybe you have a relationship with a builder who has a much larger project, and they just want to bring you in as a subcontractor for this small part. You would still need to provide responses for your section. And I would highly recommend you understand the whole contract and how you fit within it. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. So I do have a question for this group. Was the level of detail okay? Is there anything that I can alter or change for the next module to make it better for y'all?
I just have a question. In general, and with your experience, what are the chances of a European lighting company winning some sort of public procurement in the US?
Directly?
Yeah.
Snowball's chance in hell.
Okay.
It would be very limited, unless the requirement was specifically like only you could meet that. Where I think that you have a much better opportunity is with a partner, with a set aside, with someone who's already got the relationships, knows the procurement system inside and out, does this every day. Think of them, it's not only what you know, it's who you know.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yes. Okay. I know it's getting late there for y'all. If there's anything else, please, you can hit me up outside of class if there's something you'd like to do. I'm happy to take away those questions. My email is mark@sensibleevaluation.com. I can also give that to Jabril to provide to this group as well. Okay. With that, you'll have a wonderful evening.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I just cannot open my webcam right now, but I have a question. After this very encouraging statement that we have no chance ever, what about the public procurement of the federal government in Europe? Because the government, the US government has got a lot of facilities in Europe. I'm not speaking only about the embassies, but universities, but also the military bases, that are, and if I'm not wrong, all of this purchasing process are going through the federal public procurement. Maybe this can be an option for us because we have companies located in Europe, so there is no logistic issues. We have all the permissions to execute activities in the European countries. Might it be an option to consider?
Yes, I would say that is a very important distinction. So my comments were mainly for the US domestic market. Now, speaking for, let's say, embassies, military bases, other government agencies throughout the world, they purchase in a similar manner to what the US does locally, domestically. They're going to want to see local suppliers. They're going to want to see local service networks. They're going to want to buy locally. And if that's you in, say, Italy or France or wherever, yes, I think you stand a very good chance then.
But also this kind of tenders will be published on the website of the federal agencies, right?
Yes, all tenders are published through SAM.
Okay.
Yes.
And I have also another question. At the beginning, you said that GSA have some the public procurement for agencies, how to manage the process. Does it include also some technical recommendations on purchasing the lighting services? So does it exist some GSA recommendations for the public buyers, federal buyers, what they have to consider when they are procuring the lighting products? Or I don't know if there are any energy efficiency regulation standards that we can consider that they are open source in terms that we can go to see what this kind of technical recommendations are?
Yes, so I will answer your question in this way. So the two best examples I can think of for what we call supplements to the FAR would be Department of Defense and NASA. So they have very unique and specific needs. Like obviously the military has different needs than say civilian agencies. And so their supplement's going to be everything from how you classify products to how you label them. They have their own labeling criteria. And then different departments can have specific regulations for their goals. So you're correct. If there's certain climate change, so like President Biden decided to commit to some of the treaty obligations for reducing carbon emissions and instructed federal agencies to go about that route, I would not see that in the FAR because it's not across all agencies. I would expect to see that in the individual RFP. What I mean by that is the RFP itself might say, we have a goal of buying 50% of our products on this solicitation from companies that have a carbon emission of X, or you would see those requirements within the RFP, not necessarily within the FAR.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Sure. Great question, Joe. Okay, at this point in time, I'll say you guys have been a great audience. Loved answering all this and hope you enjoyed it as well. And I wish y'all a blessed day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Everyone.
Maybe Mark, just before finish, you've just given insights on I saw that your schedule we have in part two topic 2 and 3. My question is that as you asked if your methodology is okay, I just want to know if we are going to go deeper in some document you cite in the list today, or we are going to, for example, you next time talk about procurement typologies, method, friendly, position, solicitation, contract, government buyer, standard management processing. So if we are going to analyze some specific documents, or we stay at just general level, just to know.
No, so what I'll do is my plan was to pull an actual RFP document or two and actually look at the anatomy of it, go not section by section, but pull out like what are some key terms and conditions. So one that might have liquidated damages, or one that may have you not be able to assign it. Like there's some legal concepts that would be important to understand, as well as selection criteria. So if there's an RFP that's solely based on price, or maybe one that is that gives extra weight to locally sourced, whether it be locally in France for a military base that we have there, or whether it's local in Texas for, near a farm or something. But yes, we will go through actual documents.
Okay. So my final question is that if you can send us your slides, today's slides for show diffusion to cluster managers to review your content study to be ready for next lesson.
My what you guys didn't pick all of it up in 2 hours? Absolutely, I'd have no problem with that.
Okay.
Not as good students as you think, apparently.
No, you guys are great. You're asking really good questions.